I wanted to ask the guest about like a whole bunch of the rock stars that, have died, and, they all claim they were, it was just a murder or they committed suicide. I mean, like right at the height of the war, John Lennon was singing Give Peace a Chance all over TV, and then he ends up getting whacked. Right after Tupac put out the Illuminati album exposing, the Illuminati and the globalist mafia, Tupac got whacked. And then, like Jimi Hendrix, all these people had great, positive, empowering songs and were anti-war. They always end up getting whacked. There was Bob Marley. Yeah, Bob Marley was shot up, by some hit squad came in, shot up his house. He got shot a few times, and then he blamed the...
Peter Tosh, and then Bob Marley died of mysterious form of cancer.
Yeah, that he was probably mysteriously injected with.
It starts really in the 50s with The Day the Music Died. Buddy Holly.
Yeah, Big Bopper.
Rich Allen going down in that plane. Eddie Cochran.
Leonard
Slater. They took Elvis out of the circulation and put him into the Army. They sort of blackmailed Little Richard into retiring, and then, of course, in the 60s, in a row, you have Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Jimi Hendrix dying, Mama Cass, Bob Hyde of Canned Heat, Brian Epstein, you mentioned John Lennon. It seems to be a remarkably dangerous job description, being in a rock and roll band that is anti-establishment. So I think people can sort of draw their own conclusions there, but it does seem to have a normally high casualty rate for
a very dangerous industry, huh?
Yeah.
I thought firemen had it bad.
Yeah. So, I mean, who's to say? I mean, but, the fact that John Lennon was gunned down, shortly after releasing his comeback record and things like that, just the same time right after Reagan's election. So it certainly gives you a lot of food for thought, to say the least. But interestingly enough, I mean, as I was saying, in the ancient world, the ancient rock and rollers didn't really do much better in a lot of ways. I mean, Caesars would have these people crucified, would have these temples destroyed. It seems that making music that the establishment doesn't look kindly on can be dangerous, I guess.
Yeah. Do you not ask your manager any questions or even think of controlling your own money or making decisions, right?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. I mean, that's a whole other story. So many artists that have gotten completely ripped off by their managers and their record companies, and people, particularly the first wave of rockers who came out of the rhythm and blues and the soul and the gospel fields, and really a lot of these guys just died penniless. It was disgraceful. I mean, they made millions of dollars for these record companies, and a lot of them never saw a penny of it. Yeah. So it's, the same old story, I suppose.
Yeah, a couple more recent examples is, Kurt Cobain. He was, they said he had so much heroin in his body it would have been impossible for him to shoot himself. And then, who shoots himself with a shotgun? And the private investigator that Courtney hired to look for Kurt, he's going around doing interviews saying, without a doubt, it was Courtney was behind it. And right after all that happens, she starts getting in big movies, and, her bad now goes to number one. And then most recently was Michael Jackson. He was, probably the most anti-establishment of them all. His songs were like Heal the World and Earth Song and They Don't Care About Us. And, he wasn't putting up with them, and he went around talking about Sony and accusing them and, saying these people were torturing him. So, and then he ends up dying mysteriously.
Yeah, that whole situation. I mean, it's interesting. There is one caveat here, is that a lot of these people have been known to sort of live fast. Like live fast can lead to dying young. I mean, that's just my only caveat here. I mean, certainly Michael Jackson had a pretty serious drug problem that it's interesting. We were wondering for all these years why he was so eccentric and whatnot, and it turns out that he was, addicted to all these really powerful painkillers and such.
Well, that's what they tell us.
I hear what you're saying. It seems to be a lot of that going around, but music is a very powerful thing, and a lot of people will fear its power. So I guess that's the only answer I can give you.
Well, they say Michael was a drug addict, but when they just put out that movie when he was training to go on his new world tour, when you're watching him dancing and singing, he didn't look like no drug addict. He was out there moving around like he was 20 years ago. So if someone's a drug addict, I don't know how they could be doing that right before they're about to do a world tour. So I don't believe that drug addict stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see somebody look into that, see somebody really investigate that.
Yeah, it just, I'm sure it's more than a coincidence, but it's kind of interesting, really, because when you search even further, you find that these stars or rock gods or whatever were actually created. The powers that be, the controllers, CIA, etc., perhaps they kind of push them towards that.
Who are you talking about? I mean, who are you talking about?
Well, artists like, say, Led Zeppelin or, Stevie Nicks or Rhiannon or, the artists that are...
What do you mean? What is the CIA doing?
Well, the CIA obviously runs the music industry.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I would certainly...
Okay.
The people who...
Universal Music Group, Sony, Warner, EMI, Operation Mockingbird, Operation Underworld, the Bronfman family, GE, it's without a doubt they're all owned by the same people.
I understand what you're saying. So
is it them doing it, or are the artists themselves, are they tapping into the collective unconsciousness to bring forth these archetypes?
You have to really go on a case-by-case basis. Nobody told Led Zeppelin what to do. They were notorious for actually, it's very funny that the music industry was terrified of Led Zeppelin, because what Jimmy Page did is he hired basically gangsters to manage the group.
Exactly.
It actually became a very interesting situation that by the time they stopped touring, they had sort of wreaked havoc to the point that a lot of promoters were not willing to book them, because these guys, basically these gangsters that they had working for them, had terrified the entire music industry, which is really kind of fascinating.
But you bring up Zeppelin, and that's Atlantic Records, which is a subsidiary of Warner Music again, and there's the Bronfmans, the mob, the CIA.
But that's you got to understand that's all later. Those companies bought up. Atlantic was an independent label for many, many years. I'm not sure exactly when they were.
What about Phil Spector? Phil Spector.
Phil Spector is.
He's been around a long time.
Yeah, he worked with the Ramones in 1980, and they were terrified of him because he brought a gun to all the recording sessions. He basically has been the
Beatles,
canon.
Bob Dylan. All of them. And look at his brother, Arlen Spector. Single bullet theory, Arlen Spector.
They're not related. No, they're not related. It's actually Phil Spector is spelled with an O, and Arlen Spector is spelled with an E.
Well, I was just reading that they were brothers, and that Arlen was embarrassed. I was reading an article on Yahoo just right before the show.
Is that right? Let me look that up. I had not heard that.
Just right. Before. Is Phil Arlen's brother, or type in Phil and Arlen Spector. And when you look at Arlen's bios, his professional ones, they mention a brother, but they don't mention a brother's name ever. They'll mention his parents' name. They mention everything else.
I think that might be apocryphal. I've never heard that story before. Actually, because Phil Spector was originally from the Bronx, and Arlen.
Well, they were born 10 years. They were separated, and they were, raised in two different families, born 10 years apart from each other.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that because I've never heard that before.
Okay.
But Phil Spector is definitely, I mean, he was a murder trial waiting to happen.
Yeah, and he's running all of these big artists that we're talking about tonight, and there's no connection. Of course there's a connection.
Well, a connection to what? I mean, what exactly are you referring to?
Well, I'd like to, in a perfect world, we'd like to believe that the artists are there because they're the best at what they do. But the sad fact of the matter is, you know, they're there because it comes to a certain point where you're given a choice, and you are not going to be promoted worldwide and having all of these managers taking your money and writing your lyrics to be promoted to influence literally generations of people, countries of people, just because you're a good person and a good artist. I mean, many of them, Michael Jackson, for instance, or Britney Spears, or any of these people are all victims of MKUltra. I mean, they were trained from birth and tortured and drugged. So, yeah, a lot of them did drugs, but they weren't they didn't commit suicide. Those were murders. So, you know, drugs were obviously part of the culture. And, you know, getting back to what you said about glamorizing it for the people, and there's the cookie jar here, this is what you want, everyone wants to worship these gods, these stars, and, you know, but really it's they put it there for us. And then that's not to discount the talent of these artists. I love them all. I love the music, absolutely. I feel it in my bones. And I can appreciate all of them. But, I mean, you got to admit, if the music industry is run by 4 people,